There are two types of people in this world, those on a wildcard in game week 35 and those who are not. Either way, this video is for you. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to help you get set up for game week 35, whether or not you're on a wild card. I don't think it makes a massive difference in this video. I'm not on a wild card personally, but you might be. And if you are, this video is definitely going to be for you as well. To start with though, we need to talk about double game week 35 and some of the priorities for transfers in or on a wild card for this game week. Now, top of the bill will undoubtedly be Cole Palmer in sensational form this season. 30 attacking returns in just 23 starts, and one of, if not, I now think, the top point scorer since he started playing, and now a 200-point club member as well. It's been a phenomenal breakout season for Cole Palmer. Great underlying data, 0.89 XGI per 90, obviously on pens, and got 4 goals in his most recent fixture. The only asterisk with Cole Palmer is that he's picked up a bit of an illness as it stands. Monday night, I'm recording this, and he's a doubt for the game week 34 match against Arsenal. Now, I don't think that that's going to be an issue by the time we get to game week 35 and that double of Aston Villa away and Spurs at home. Both pretty important fixtures for Chelsea as they make a late push for Europe, and they're going to want to put out their best starting 11, and Cole Palmer is obviously going to be a part of that. If they can avoid benching him or having him out of the side, they definitely will do so. So I'd be very surprised if he wasn't going to be number one priority and probably the best captaincy shout for game week 35. So top of the bill for me. Second in the list would be Son Heung-min, and I think he's probably at this point the only player in Spurs 11 that I'd say I would rip up my team to make sure I had at the moment. I think all of the other ones are negotiable. Son probably is too, just about, but I would say he's on the low end of negotiable. I'd very much want him in my side, especially if I was on a wild card this week and had the pick of anyone. Good underlying data, 0.58 XGI per 90. Obviously, he's on penalties, and obviously he gets very good minutes, 80 plus most, if not all weeks. More often than not, 90 as well. Now, Spurs haven't been in the best form recently, but Son is a player that can score against anyone. Even with a tricky double game week of Arsenal and Chelsea, I'd expect him to do pretty decently. And of course, that's not taking into account their future fixtures. They've got Burnley to play, Sheffield United to play in the last 2 game weeks, and of course, that other double game week in 37 too. So I'd be very keen to include both Palmer and Son on a wild card, or make sure that you use your free transfers to get to both of those players as a priority. Moving down the list, Nicholas Jackson is the next player that I'd be very, very interested in, although there is some sort of asterisk, I guess you'd call it, against his name for the time being. Now, that is because he's on 9 yellow cards for the time being, and if he picks up that 10th yellow card in the midweek against Arsenal, then he will be banned for 2 games, and that would take him completely out of the double game week in 35 against Aston Villa and Tottenham. Now, obviously, if he's banned, we'll know that in midweek anyway, so wildcarders wouldn't have to go there. But if you're using transfers, I would highly recommend not buying Jackson until we know that he survived that ban in the midweek against Arsenal. If he does so, he's got great underlying data, 0.67. And again, Chelsea, 2 double game weeks between now and the end of the season. That's going to be a massive advantage having him in your side. And I would say he's probably my second favourite Chelsea asset if he does survive the ban. My third favourite would be Malo Gusto. Now, the one issue with Gusto is that he has picked up a little bit of an injury and he's a bit of a doubt for the Arsenal game in midweek. It could possibly mean he's also a problem for game week 35, but at this point we just don't know. Now, I think, again, if you're on a wild card, I'd wait until last minute, wait until the press conferences. We'll have more information. And if you can wait it out, I wouldn't be making any transfers to bring him in at this point. But if he does survive that fitness concern, he's going to be a good pickup for the rest of the season, considering his price point, very cheap budget enabler, great on a bench boost for game week 37 as well, because it enables so much elsewhere. And his underlying data is still pretty good at 0.21 XGI per 90 as well. He does tick a lot of boxes, looks good going forward, so if he survives the injury concern, he would be a very good pickup on a wild card, and I've got him in my side right now. I'm certainly not considering selling him unless we get concrete news that he's definitely going to be out of game week 35. Now, the next player also has a bit of an injury flag against him right now. Pedro Porro is, I think, a hopeful to start against Arsenal at home in game week 35. That's the word from the club at the moment, that they're hoping he will be fit and ready to start for what is obviously a very important North London derby for them, especially with other injury doubts elsewhere in Spurs starting 11 right now. And I will come on to one of the key ones in just a moment's time. Porro will be probably very important to get back into that starting 11 very quickly. And unless he's a significant doubt, I would expect him to start. Very similar to Gusto, though. I'd wait until last minute. He's a player that's on my radar for game week 35. And if I'm going to buy him, it will be a last minute move once we get press conference confirmation from Postecoglou, who is usually pretty transparent with these things. So fingers crossed we get a positive update on him. And if so, 2 double game weeks, Burnley and Sheffield United still to play, and good underlying data at 0.27 XGI per 90. He ticks a ton of boxes, and if he survives that injury flag, he would definitely be another player that I'd want in my starting 11 for game week 35. So sadly, one player that we definitely can't rely on for game week 35 is Destiny Udogie, and again, sadly, he has provided his own personal injury update on Instagram saying he's actually out for the rest of the season now. And actually, again, third really sadly for him, probably out of the Euros as well. So unfortunately, Destiny Udogie, even though I picked him up on a wildcard in game week 30, hasn't really returned me any points either. So very frustrating one, is now no longer going to be an option for game week 35, 37. It's just not going to be on the cards. So the question is, what are we going to do with him? Obviously, you can't pick him up on a wild card, so that's a slot that maybe you had allocated to a Spurs defender that you might have to look elsewhere for. Pedro Porro, as I mentioned, is probably going to be the number one option as a replacement, but he could be a doubt as well. So beyond that, who else are we looking at? And there are a few different teams and options you can look at potentially as alternatives. Now, number one, I think Newcastle are going to be quite interesting on a wild card. I'll come on to another of their options in just a moment's time, but you could potentially look at their defenders as replacements or a different slot in your wildcard 15 for Destiny Udogie replacement. So good fixtures between now and the end of the season. No double game week in 35, but really good fixtures in 35, 36, and a double game week in 37. Newcastle options are going to be tempting, and I'd probably be looking at Fabian Schär at the moment as my preferred choice. A little bit more expensive, but he is nailed down for minutes. And again, decent underlying attacking data from corners, from set pieces as well. Another option could be Kieran Trippier, although as far as we're concerned at the moment, he's still an injured out. So probably not one that you can go for at the moment with any sort of confidence. Outside of that, you're probably looking at Man City options as the next tier. And even though their defence is superior to Newcastle's, the attacking upside isn't really as consistent, and they do rotate a little bit more. So less security of minutes. But I think if you're brave enough, then going for someone like Gvardiol could be a really interesting upside pick. Now, he's one of the only Man City defenders with decent attacking upside, as owners will attest to for the last couple of game weeks. And he is a player that, more so than most Man City defenders, has been pretty reliable on minutes as well. So if I was going to look at a Man City defender, it would probably be Gvardiol at this point in time. Double game week in 37, good fixtures between now and the end of the season, and of course, a pretty strong defence, albeit they do tend to find a way of conceding one goal a game pretty consistently, so it can be a bit frustrating. Outside of that, if you wanted a differential option, you might look at Man United. Jokes aside, Dalot has been pretty reliable in their side so far this season, and they do have decent fixtures between now and the end of the season, double game week in 37, and Dalot's got okay attacking upside as well. All being level though, I'd probably go for Schär or Gvardiol ahead of a Man United option at this point, and unfortunately I am going to be needing to make a transfer myself, so Porro, Gvardiol, Dalot even, or Schär are all options for me as Udogie replacements. So let me know in the comments below which one you prefer, because that will help me out come Friday and Saturday when the deadline hits. So one player I'd certainly be looking at if I was on a wildcard in game week 35, and to be honest, even with free transfers, could still be an option, is Bruno Fernandes. Now, he hasn't had a standout season by his standards, but he has still been ticking along pretty decently, and the underlying data is still good. 0.53 XGI per 90 is not bad, and at his price of just 8.3 million, it's really not too bad considering the fixtures to come between now and the end of the season. Burnley at home in 35 is a great jumping on point, and then obviously double game week in game week 37 and decent fixtures either side of that in 36 and 38. Bruno Fernandes will certainly be a strong candidate for a midfield 5 on wildcard this week. And he's been in good form as well. 7 attacking returns in the last 6 game weeks. Yes, he has come under criticism at times this year, but he's been performing pretty well. And as an FPL asset, I think we put league form and Man United's form aside for one moment, and you look at him just objectively as a player that's scoring points in FPL right now, and he's doing a pretty decent job at it for the price. So I think if I was on a wild card, he would probably be one of the favoured 5 in midfield right now, considering the fixtures, considering the data, and considering his personal form. If I was on just free transfers, and I am looking at manoeuvring a couple of people at the moment, Fernandes is an option I'm considering, albeit probably not the strongest option or the first option on my radar. He's a player that maybe I should be considering a little bit more strongly because he has got good data, he is on penalties, and he's relatively differential at this point. Although it must be said, I can see him becoming less and less differential as we close in on game week 35, because even without a double, game week 35 for Man United looks pretty strong at home to Burnley. And then obviously decent fixtures between now and the end of the season as well. He's a player that I would urge you to consider, especially if you're on a wildcard. So one player that could be an option to go without on a wildcard or just to transfer out this week is Bukayo Saka. And I was really umming and ahhing about Saka in game week 33 as a transfer out for someone like Foden or Gordon. Foden obviously was leaked to start, so I made the move to Foden, and then Foden, as we know, did not start. So little bit of regret there, but actually it did work out for the best, because I think if I still had him in my side now, it would still be a transfer that I probably wanted to make between now and game week 37. As it is, if you have Bukayo Saka right now, or if you're considering picking him on a wild card, I think it's a tough call. I don't really know what I would do if I was in this position right now, but he has looked a little bit leggy recently. They don't have a double game week between now and the end of the season. And the fixtures, whilst objectively good, Tottenham away, Bournemouth at home, Man United away, Everton at home, that's not a bad runway between now and the end of the season. I think there are other players who are strong contenders, especially on a wildcard, or if you're using free transfers, that I think arguably could outdo Saka between now and the end of the season. And if you're willing to take a bit of a risk and chase the upside to chase rank, going against a player who has got high ownership like Saka could be the key if you think that you can pick a player that's going to outperform him, and therefore it will gain you decent rank on the managers that just stick with the tried and trusted Sakas, the Salahs of the world, who will still have decent ownership. Especially if you're in a mini league, you're chasing someone down and you need to start taking gambles. I'd say Saka especially is a player that maybe you could look going without, especially because he's looked like he's been walking wounded a little bit recently, not been in the greatest of form, and the fixtures, whilst good, don't include a double game week, while some players you might be considering might have 6 fixtures between 35 and 38. Arsenal only have 4. That might be also a good thing. It might mean that Arsenal are able to rest a little bit more, and in the fixtures they do have, they're able to perform a little bit better because, as I've mentioned with Saka, kind of goes for the whole team. They've looked a little bit tired, a little bit leggy. They've had to rotate a little bit, and now they're out of the Champions League. They only have to focus on the league. These will be 4 cup finals for them between now and the end of the season as they chase down a league title. And they are going to put out the strongest possible 11. Saka is a part of that. He's on penalties, great underlying data. So that would be the argument against selling him. However, if you're in a strong position, you might want to keep hold of him just to maintain rank, not take any risks. But certainly if you're chasing, I think going without Saka could be a calculated gamble you might want to make on a wildcard in game week 35. And I actually think it will be quite popular to go without him if you are on a wildcard. I haven't seen many wildcard midfield fives this week that include Bukayo Saka. So maybe there is a bit of a safety net there if you go without him now. And going with him might be more differential than I'm expecting. But either way, he's a great asset. He's going to continue starting, I'm sure, and will return pretty decently between now and the end of the season. It's just whether or not a player with more game weeks or more games in the next 4 game weeks, rather, will outdo him. And I think if I was in that position, I would take a calculated gamble on chancing my arm without him for the next 4 game weeks and maybe bringing him back in for game week 38 for one last hurrah. So Saka is going to be one of the players that will be up for debate on a wildcard this week or with free transfers. The other one, probably the more important one, is going to be Mo Salah. And he will be a player that will be mainly talked about in all content this week. Obviously, I'm going to be no different. He's going to be a major talking point. We're only halfway through game week 34, but it was already pretty disappointing because he was benched in the first half of that game week. So I've captained him. I know a lot of managers in game week 34 have, and will obviously be pretty disappointed with not only his returns in game week 34 so far, but also in recent weeks before that too. He has been wasteful in front of goal. He's only really returned with penalties recently, which obviously is a positive because he's still on penalties. But outside of that, he has been pretty disappointing, especially when you consider how expensive he is and what you can do with the money if you don't have him in your side. Now, I've got him in my side right now. I'm on a free hit in game week 34, so coming out of it, I'll have 1 free transfer. Salah is a player that I am looking at potentially getting rid of pretty soon in the run-up to game week 37. He is also a player I could get rid of in game week 35. Now, there's one player in particular that I am looking at buying for him in game week 35 with good fixtures that I'll come on to in just a moment's time. But if you're on a wild card this week, it's a pretty tough decision, but I think I would actually probably chance my arm a bit like with Saka and go without Salah, partly because of the form, but also partly because they've only got 4 games left. Other teams have 5 or even 6. And I think I would take a calculated gamble, again, a bit like Saka, going without him and hoping that he continues to be fairly wasteful, maybe even gets rested or rotated once or twice as well because he's been out of form. We don't really know the full story behind why he didn't play in the first half of game week 34, probably because he was rested, right? And so because they're out of all other European competition, they're out of all of the cups, it is pretty likely that they'll start or be able to start their strongest 11 between now and the end of the season. But maybe he does come off early sometimes if he's not performing well. And for that price, can you find other things to do with that money and build a stronger 15, especially as so many managers will be looking to bench boost in game week 37? The things you can do with your side by downgrading Salah to a mid-price midfielder, someone around 6, 7, 8 million, you've got another 5, 6, 7 million to spend elsewhere to bolster your full 15 and have a really strong bench on a bench boost in game week 37. Now, he's got decent fixtures. West Ham obviously just conceded 5 to Palace, and Tottenham have been leaking goals as well. So I wouldn't be too worried if I had Salah for those 2 weeks. But all things being equal, I think there are other players that I back to match him in those game weeks for less money, and then do have a double game week in game week 37. So he's one of the kings of FPL, and he will continue to score goals and points, I'm sure of it. It's just whether or not you can do more with the money and also find another player that can either match or outperform him in the position for much less money whilst bolstering elsewhere. And it's a decision I'll be weighing up all week, whether or not to get rid of him this week or later down the line. But I'm pretty confident I will be selling him before game week 37 to do more with my bench boost. And if I was on a wildcard this week, I have to admit, I don't think I'd have him in it right now. And that is a risky strategy, of course, but I think a lot of managers will come to that conclusion and his ownership will drop pretty quickly, making him maybe not such a risk to go without by the time we get to game week 36, 37, because so many managers might have sold him on a game week 35 wildcard. There is a player in particular I would be looking at bringing in this game week for Mo Salah. So let's talk about him right now. So one player that would absolutely be on my wildcard this week, and again is hot property right now, even with free transfers, would be Anthony Gordon. Now let's start off with the fixtures. Sheffield United, Burnley, then a double of Brighton and Man United, both of which concede a fair amount of goals at the moment, and then Brentford in game week 38, who will probably have nothing to play for by that point. Newcastle have looked pretty strong recently. Gordon has looked phenomenal, especially recently, but all season long. Maybe even an outside contender for maybe not quite player of the season, but definitely in the conversation as one of the better, if not elite players this season. 23 attacking returns at 6.1 million is phenomenal. Almost an XGI per 90 of 0.5, which again is very good, especially without penalties. And with those fixtures, I don't think there's any reason, barring injury, that I'd be not including him on a wild card. Probably one of the first picks on a wild card right now. Besides that, if you're not on a wild card, I think there's a strong argument to consider bringing him in this week ahead of a lot of the Chelsea or the Spurs assets who even have a double game week in game week 35 and therefore an extra fixture than Newcastle do between now and the end of the season. I just think Newcastle are that good going forward. Gordon is that good at the moment and their fixtures are so strong that I'd probably prioritise someone like Anthony Gordon over the likes of a Richarlison or a Maddison or a Sterling, for instance. Maybe not Palmer or Son. I think they stand just above the rest right now. But outside of that, probably the third most important midfielder I'd be including would be Anthony Gordon. And if I'm using free transfers on midfielders this week, he would be the number one pick I'd be considering. So if I'm looking at selling Mo Salah, as I just mentioned, Gordon would be probably the number one pick to replace him. And all of that money that I'd save as well, 7.5 million, I think it is, or maybe a little bit less because I've got money saved up in Salah, maybe over 7 million to use elsewhere to help build a really strong bench boost by game week 37 could really come in handy. And looking at these fixtures, Sheffield United, Burnley, and then the double, I can see him matching, if not beating Mo Salah's points totals in each of those individual weeks, even before we get to the double in game week 37. So I think it's a strong suggestion that Gordon would be a very good transfer in this week, even without the double. And as long as I can navigate all the other injuries that are seeming to pile up in my side at the moment, Gordon would be, in an ideal world, a transfer that I would want to make this week for Mo Salah. But maybe because of other injuries, I might have to put off for 1, maybe even 2 weeks, which would be very frustrating because I think he will be very, very important to include on a wildcard. I can see his ownership rising very quickly, a bit like Alexander Isak as well, who I'm not talking about today, but similarly, I think will be almost essential on a wildcard right now with these fixtures. A Newcastle double up in attack looks very, very strong right now. Isak's got a great price point too, obviously in the form of his career right now and hunting down an outside shout at the Golden Boot as well. Those two players, I think, would be very, very important as free transfers or on a wild card. And I really, really hope that I can get to double a Newcastle attack very, very soon. So there you have it. Those are my transfer tips as we head into double game week 35. Obviously, we've got the second half of 34 to go. So injuries can crop up, other rotation can crop up. And I will be talking about all of that later on this week as I go through my team selection ahead of double game week 35. So with that in mind, please do remember to leave a like, but importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content, especially if you have enjoyed today's video. And I'll see you later this week as we lock in my team ahead of the big double for game week 35.